Well, maybe I'll turn to Lindsey next, Haji, if you can wait a little longer, to give us some insight of what the analysis is saying about both the process and the text and the implementation, I suppose.
Sure, thank you. I just wanted to make 5 relatively quick points. I might need the clicky jobby.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's its technical term. And I wanted to start on a positive, really, because I think there are quite a lot of positives if we look at the process itself. Here I'm comparing the pre-zero draft, which was released a few months ago, compared to what we have in front of us now. And if you look at that, actually, if you're focusing specifically on climate change, there are there is progress that you can actually note on that. Climate change, in terms of the amount of references that are made, is enhanced. The pre-zero draft had 15 references. The one now has 22. Now, references don't really mean anything. It's more about the substance. And if you look at the substance, actually, that's also improved. In particular, the recognition that climate change is one of many drivers. And if you look at the text here, there's a lot of reference to wider drivers of development impacting on the impacts of climate change, but also influencing those and playing through those wider drivers. So issues of poverty, issues of natural land degradation, each of those issues are recognized alongside climate change, which is what we're always pushing for. So not considering it as a siloed approach. So those are some positives. The other thing that I've been rather impressed with the draft as it is now is the strong emphasis on science, and that's very positive. In particular, there's a specific reference in there as well to the GFCS, the Global Framework for Climate Services, which is the WMO's big push at the moment to recognize the impact of climate services and promote that in policy and planning. Why there aren't other references to other particular mechanisms and just the GFCS, I'm not sure. But that's positive, and that's a starting point. I think there's a notable lack of the more important issue of boundary agents and the role that they play in promoting the science for DRR and for climate change, but that's an issue that perhaps can be fleshed out a little further. But as I said, good starting points. Obviously, there's more that can be done, and I think a few starting points. I'm rather surprised not to see our latest. The last few years we have the Special Report on Extremes by the IPCC and its more recent Fifth Assessment Report, specific reference to those documents, which are our best, our reference points to the science of climate change and the science of the relationships between disasters and climate. So having that included, even within the preamble, would be a very reassuring starting point. The second and more important point I wanted to raise was, if you look through it, there is recognition that risks are changing, particularly climate risks. But if overall, you get the impression that it's mainly talking about static risks. And it's very little in there that addresses this issue that risks are going to change. They've changed already, and they're likely to change even by 2030 in ways that need to be addressed within our decision-making processes at the moment. And if you look at the text, there's very little that encourages that. These issues of trying to promote flexible and forward-looking decision-making really isn't there, and it needs to be. And it reflects, again, in the words that are used within the text. You'll see issues of climate scenarios being referred to. That's a rather old and relatively lame way of trying to address the forward-looking aspect of decision-making. Yes, we can use climate scenarios to help inform what will happen in the future and make preparations for that. But it's really it's wider than just using climate scenarios. You need to be thinking about decision-making under uncertainty, recognizing that scenarios can tell you something, but at the end of the day, you're still going to have to be planning for a range of different possible outcomes. Some may be known, some may be unknown. So promoting some of this decision-making and uncertainty, robust decision-making, which is quite common within the adaptation literature, that would be, again, an area that could significantly, in my opinion, enhance the text. The third point, as has been touched on by Ursula a little bit, is that, yes, there is recognition about these wider processes, and that's really important. We need to be seeing Paris mentioned in here. We need to be seeing the negotiations in New York through the development post-2015 framework as well. But in terms of the substance as to how these are going to connect, there's nothing. And that's the really important bit. We can't really wait until each of these outcomes have happened. We can't wait until Sendai's happened to see what happens in Paris and then to see what happens in New York after that. Because in a sense, that's kicking it down the road. And it encourages as well, for each process to happen in isolation, wait for the other one to happen, and by that point, we all know it's too late really to include it as a meaningful agenda within each of those frameworks. And it's most important for the Sendai process, mainly because there's very likely to be a goal on resilience, and within that climate extremes within the SDG, well, not a goal, rather, a target within the poverty goal. And that's really, really important. That's going to have a huge impact on how DRR is implemented across the world. You could argue, and I think I would argue, that if you get a strong target within the SDGs, as well as perhaps an adaptation goal within the UNFCCC process, those are likely to have more of an impact on how DRR is implemented than a Hyogo framework. A Hyogo 2 framework, something that comes out of Sendai. So it's really important that these are linked. And in terms of the actual substance, the fourth point I wanted to raise is it really matters around the most important bit, which is inevitably finance, unfortunately. The issue of how do you link financial mechanisms for the promotion of adaptation, and related to that, DRR within climate adaptation is key. If you look at sort of the range of international climate change adaptation projects that are happening at the moment, an ODI piece recently released showed that between 2003 and 2011, $1 billion of climate finance actually went towards DRR, either as a primary mechanism through which adaptation was delivered, or as a secondary factor through that project. 60% of climate change adaptation programs by 2011 were actually related, whether either primary or secondary, to the delivery of DRR. So there's a huge amount of overlap here. And if you look at the amount of finance that's likely to go towards climate change adaptation and going forward past Paris, this is really key. These financial mechanisms, sorting them out, making sure that they're linked specifically within the text, is a really, really key point. And it's, in a sense, misguided not to actually have these financial mechanisms included specifically and addressed. The last point I wanted to make was around learning. And I think all of us have sort of touched on these issues. There's a lot that the DRR agenda here, looking at Sendai, can learn from what's happened more recently in the climate change adaptation agenda. And I know that DRR has been around a lot longer than adaptation, but there's a lot that also can be learnt from the way that adaptation has risen in terms of its importance globally. What you've seen is that adaptation has migrated from a small siloed issue. It's moved outside of ministries of environment and ministries of natural resource management. And it's migrated to ministries of finance, ministries of economic planning. And that's been a complete paradigm shift. In a sense, now we have the real people who matter in terms of delivering at the national level policies have been engaged and are committed to deliver adaptation. And with that also, you have DRR, because usually what happens is that when you talk about adaptation, it's really DRR. It's climate extremes that people are interested in, if you're looking at Africa, if you're looking at South Asia. So this has been a big shift, and it's meant that the way that you try and deliver adaptation has changed. I think the same can be promoted within how we try and push forward on DRR. I think we have to try and recognize that if we want this to be a meaningful framework, then we have to see how we can engage more powerful actors. You look, for example, at Ethiopia and Rwanda, you have a place where you have champions of change right at the top that have decided that adaptation, and with that DRR, is a big priority for their country, and they delivered that. Let's see if we can do the same, building on what we've learned from the adaptation agenda, and see how we can get DRR higher up the agenda in these people that, or pushing it in the minds of the people that really do matter. Yes, there are issues with regards to whether you agree with the particular top-down regimes or the ones that I've highlighted, yes. But in terms of actually engaging and delivering actual change, there's going to have to be some trade-offs there. And identifying the right entry points, understanding the political economy of national and local decision-making is the key point. So those are my five. It's positives. More can still be done, particularly around this changing nature of risks and addressing that within the text. Recognizing the overlaps between the different post-2015 frameworks, and more importantly, acting with substance. Trying to address this issue of finance, and then lastly, trying to learn from the climate change, from the disaster angles, as well as wider than that as well.
Great. Lindsey, thank you very much indeed. That was very clear, and lots of material in that for people to pick up on and respond to as well.